The CRPPK aimed to expose systematic attacks on intellectual, political, and cultural life in Kenya to an international audience. So I began volunteering with the George Padmore Institute in 2013, and one of the very first tasks I was given in the archive was to sort through a series of large cardboard boxes labeled Kenya. These had come to the GPI from the personal collections of its founding chair, John LaRose, and were filled to the brim with some really extraordinary materials, all related to the struggle against repression and autocracy in 1980s and 90s Kenya. This struggle was a truly international one. It brought together campaigners, exiles, and organizations from around the world with underground political activists and political prisoners in Kenya itself. The majority of the GPI's materials relate to a London-based organization called the Committee for the Release of Political Prisoners in Kenya, or the CRPPK. The CRPPK was founded on 2nd July 1982, and it was coordinated by John LaRose from the office in New Beacon Books in Finsbury Park.
Well, I was raised in North London, Stoke Newington in particular, and my education was essentially a Eurocentric education. I am of African origin, Jamaican origin, and I wish to ensure that I re-educated myself essentially. And there were only 2 bookshops in North London that provided materials, books and other resources for that purpose. And the first was Head Start in Tottenham, North London, and the second was New Beacon Books.
So why was such an organization established? In the first place, the timing is significant. So 1 month earlier, in June 1982, the Kenyan president, Daniel Arap Moi, had amended the Kenyan constitution to consolidate one-party rule in the country, which had been kind of de facto one-party rule since independence from British rule in 1963, but now this would be enshrined in the constitution. And this period also saw a crackdown on critics of the Kenyan government, many of them writers, artists, students, academics. The early 1980s was a period characterized by mass detentions without trial, hurried court proceedings, death sentences, extended jail terms, the routine confiscation of passports, and additional sort of controls over movement of opposition voices. But the inspiration for a solidarity movement that would support political dissidents in Kenya goes back a bit further than this, to 31st December 1977. On this date, on New Year's Eve 1977, the writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o was arrested and detained in maximum security prison in Nairobi. He would be kept there for a year without any charge.
One of the first books by an African writer that I read was Petals of Blood by Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
Ngugi had recently published a novel, Petals of Blood, which was critical of neo-colonial abuses of power in an ostensibly independent Kenya.
And I was inspired by the struggles of the Mama and how they challenged the British imperialists who were seeking to dominate them in their own land. And I found that very inspiring.
He was also involved in organizing a peasants and workers theater group in Limuru in central Kenya. Ngugi was arrested under public security regulations, and some of his work was banned by the government. Amnesty International swiftly adopted him as a prisoner of conscience, and appeals for his release were made across the world.
I have heard Ngugi wa Thiong'o speak publicly of how he appreciated the support that he received from the international network, so that he would know that he was not alone, that their struggle was not being forgotten.
After his release, he faced continued harassment from government officials, and there was fear of a plot against his life, which led him to leave Kenya in exile in the United Kingdom. And Ngugi's presence in London from 1982 made him an important inspiration for the CRPPK.
Through attending events such as the International Book Fair of radical Black and Third World books, I encountered many authors from around the world, from around the Caribbean, from Africa. And as a result of my, I suppose, frequent attendance at the bookshop, John LaRose invited me to become a member of the committee for the release of political prisoners in Kenya. And I was honoured to be asked to be a member of the committee.
The CRPPK aimed to expose what they called Moi's systematic attacks on intellectual, political, and cultural life in Kenya to an international audience. The collection at the GPI demonstrates just how varied the CRPPK's campaign strategies were in terms of their methods. There appear at once information pamphlets, press releases, bulletins, calls to the picket line, alongside advertisements for public discussions, cultural events. Of special importance were letter writing campaigns directed both at Kenyan embassies and high commissions abroad, but also President Moi's office in Nairobi.
We brought to the attention of those who would otherwise not know about the conditions under which those with political views that differed from the regime in Kenya, how they were being treated, how their views were being stifled, and how they were suffering at the hands of the Kenyan regime. I actually recall being on a demonstration outside of the Kenyan embassy with John LaRose when a well-known UK TV broadcaster, Trevor McDonald, stopped when he saw John LaRose and the rest of us protesting to ask why were we protesting. So I know that our message and our actions were important in getting out the message that things were not all good in Kenya and that they were stifling freedom of speech.
I think it is important to see the collection on Kenya as part of John LaRose's broader commitment to independent thought and creative expression, and his defense of dissident artists, writers, and activists against a whole range of paranoid and overbearing states. We know LaRose had himself faced censure in his native Trinidad, where he was blacklisted by the colonial government and forced into exile in 1958. We also know that he was critical of the emergence of neo-colonial and often repressive new nation-states in the Caribbean after independence. But LaRose was also concerned about the desire of communist states to bring creativity under state control. This was reflected in his impressions of Soviet Eastern Europe, which he toured in the 1950s. And a couple of decades later, he would even condemn Fidel Castro's Cuba in 1971, following the imprisonment of the poet Alberto Padilla. The activities of the CRPPK are thus a powerful example of a much wider 20th century phenomenon, that is, the attempt to raise consciousness around a particular state's abuses of power on an international stage, and to use that international pressure to direct it towards reform or revolution. And the category of political prisoner has been central to this. There is no internationally recognized legal definition of a political prisoner, and indeed the term is often used as a tool by campaign groups or international organizations to draw attention to someone who has been unjustly detained, perhaps on false or manufactured charges, and to argue instead that they have been incarcerated due to their beliefs or activities or attachment to a cause that those in power see as a threat. So this category of the political prisoner is very much a polemical one. This figure's imprisonment has consequences not just for that individual person, but represents the problems of an entire political culture and its legal order. And this is as true today, from Baba Jan in Pakistan to Chelsea Manning in the United States, as it was in 1970s or 80s Kenya, and indeed as it was in the colonial period from India to Ireland.
The archive, the George Padmore Institute archive, is of tremendous importance. I can't stress how important it is, because what it provides are source materials upon which and about which and with which those who seek to write or publish can write our history. People like me, people of African descent, from a working class background, our history can be written by people like us from an African perspective and not a Eurocentric perspective. It enables the struggles of radical and African people, Caribbean people, to be recorded for posterity.
As with much of the GPI's archives, this Kenya collection has relevance not just for how we think about the past, but also offers inspiration and indeed a model for organizing in the present. In the first place, it is a powerful testament to the importance of internationalism in political work, not just in terms of amplifying campaigns, but in sharing resources, offering a wide and robust network for the support of dissidents and exiles. The CRPPK coordinated with a number of Kenyan exile political organizations based in the UK and the US, Australia, Denmark, Italy, Norway, and Sweden, as well as, of course, movements within Kenya itself. Second, the collection demonstrates the vast amount of research and careful thinking that was characteristic of the activism of John LaRose and those affiliated with the New Beacon Circle more generally. This is seen most clearly in the CRPPK's official bulletin, Kenyan News, which was circulated widely as an authoritative, uncensored voice on current events in Kenya.
The struggles, the battles, the brutality, not just physical brutality, but the mental brutality that was suffered by so many of us. Those records are retained and will be retained.
The archive collection includes hundreds and hundreds of news clippings and documents collected by comrades in Kenya or across a worldwide network. It traces countless individual arrests and detentions, as well as issues related to the states, law, economy, public health, even the politics of Kenya's tourism industry.
And most importantly, for those who strive for justice, fairness and equality, for whom the struggles continue, they can use those archives. They can look at what worked, what didn't work, as they go forward to secure fairness, justice and equality for all.
The collection gives us insight into the process that went into campaigns, and particularly their design. We have in these files a whole range of cut and paste DIY templates for posters and pamphlets, and it's easy to imagine committee members gathered around a table crowded with paper and scissors, assembling images and text together to be photocopied and distributed widely by post or by hand. Though technology has advanced, obviously, today in the 21st century, there's still a lot to learn, I think, from this, the aesthetics of this activism, especially what can be done with basically no budget at a very grassroots level, with the confidence that comes with a dream to change the world.